Hey everyone, today we're going to look back into Dead by Daylight's past and discuss some of the most controversial changes or updates that have happened. I'm not going to be able to cover every single controversial change in this video because, well, there's been a lot, but hey, we can cover a few. Let's get into it. Alright, let's start off with the fairly recent nerf to the perk Decisive Strike. This change was released in patch 4.6.0 and simply read, Decisive Strike now deactivates when performing certain actions that are not part of evading the killer. DS is a perk meant to stop tunneling being a killer's repeat focus on one survivor to get them out of the game and make the rest of the game easier. What DS does is give you a 60-second window, where if the killer downs you and then picks you up, you can stun them and run away, basically stopping the tunnel. This would lead to many people abusing this though, using the free time that DS provided after being unhooked to do a generator in front of the killer with little to no consequences, as even if they were downed and picked up, the killer would either be hit by DS, or if they left them, they'd simply be wasting time. This change in 4.6.0 basically meant the perk was now only to stop tunneling, and it did this by having the perk deactivate if you were doing any other action aside evading the killer. As if you touched a generator or saved another survivor, you clearly weren't being tunneled anymore, and so it deactivated. The whole change wasn't directly a nerf, but more a rework, although realistically it was a nerf. This one was controversial just because of how used this perk was, and how much it had been used for pretty much the past 3 or 4 years. It had been through nerfs and changes in the past already, such as the initial change to it in 2016, around its release. Originally, Decisive Strike was even less of an anti-tunnel perk. Let's do a brief rundown of this perk's very overpowered history. Starting off in 1.2.1 upon its release, this perk basically worked as a free escape. When picked up by the killer, you would be given a Decisive Strike skill check to hit. If you hit it, it would stun the killer for 5 seconds. You didn't need to be the obsession, you didn't need to have been hooked prior, or tunneled. If you were picked up at any point, first down, first pick up, and you could use this perk to get free. This was nerfed in 1.3.0, but not by that much, reducing the stun duration from 5 seconds to 4 seconds as the only change. In 1.4.0, it was seemingly caught on that this perk was absolutely ridiculous, and so it was changed to now require you to be the obsession to use the perk instantly. If you were not the obsession, you would now have to get your wiggle meter to 35% before using DS. Yep, so not much of a nerf really. This led to a strategy known as DS dribbling, where a killer would pick a survivor up and drop them frequently as they made their way to a hook, in order to stop a survivor from using DS at their 35% wiggle timer. In patch 2.6.0, it was then made into how it was for quite a while, requiring first to be hooked to use it, and giving a 60-second window for it to be used, with a 3-second stun after a successful DS. This was clearly quite a controversial change at the time too, because the devs released a whole Q&A on this perk and its change alone. DS was then actually further buffed in 2.6.3 up to a 5-second stun. Finally, in 4.6.0 it was reworked to its current state to better reflect a perk filling an anti-tunnel role. Okay, next up. This one I actually very much struggled to find anything on. It seems it has been entirely forgotten in time, possibly because it was overshadowed by the hillbilly changes to his chainsaw and the overheat mechanic. Basically, this was a nerf to auras, which hey, probably sounds like a strange nerf. How can you even nerf auras? Well, basically, where auras used to be these big blocky things that outline the survivor, with this update in August of 2020 and in patch 4.1.0, they became these creepy skeletal frames that outline the features of survivors, killers, and generators by just their structure, and didn't fill in much of the central area of what was being revealed by the aura. This was actually only for a very brief duration of time, as it was fixed, or changed about a week later in patch 4.1.1. The issue wasn't even so much that the auras were bad looking, because they actually looked quite cool and blended nicely with Dead by Daylight's aesthetic, giving a creepier look to otherwise quite bright and maybe a bit out of tone auras. However, with this change, all of the auras were pretty much impossible to see unless you were within about 20 meters of someone. For killers, this had huge effects on frequently used perks like barbecue and chili, where the perk would be incredibly hard to use as the auras at a long distance were so faint. And this was accentuated further when playing on realms like Coldwind Farm, where a survivor with a yellow aura would be near impossible to make out through all of the corn. When they were changed, I believe they were actually made quite a lot brighter. It's kinda cool to look back on though, and this is a great example too of behavior reacting very quickly to player feedback, changing this around in the space of a week. And this one's a pig nerf, to which you will likely say, which one? Well, in patch 2.7.0, the pig received a nerf to the way her reverse bear traps worked. Pig's reverse bear traps activate when a generator is completed currently, basically allowing 5 chances for these traps to be activated. If you didn't know, reverse bear traps, if active, will kill a survivor when exiting the trial through an exit gate. The old reverse bear traps, pre 2.7.0, would activate not only when a generator was completed, but also when the endgame collapse began, basically giving a whole reason to use or save them toward the endgame, and disallowing survivors from leaving until the trap was taken off. Further, if the endgame began by closing the hatch, this would also mean a trap survivor would have to remove their trap before exiting through a gate. Currently, you can have an inactive trap on your head during the endgame and you can leave freely, as long as it's not active. This doesn't seem too bad, but this is a really odd change to have done to Pig, who's quite frankly weak enough as it is. The nerf is just another situation of, okay, but why? If anything, allowing trap activation after the endgame begins adds a whole other element to how the traps can be used and makes the traps themselves a lot more impactful and something the survivors do need to keep track of and manage, which is kind of what powers are meant to be, or the main thing survivors are meant to manage in response to how the killer uses them. Also, like, lore-wise, this makes sense. Leaving a trial with a trap on your head that can rip your jaws apart doesn't seem exactly like surviving or escaping, as the killer still has a hold on you. For example, with the twins, if Victor is attached to you, you can't leave the trial until you get him off. I don't see why the reverse bear trap should be any different personally. This change still stands today. It's nothing huge, but a bit like Billy's overheat, I don't think it really needed to happen. For this one, we're looking at a nerf to the Spirit. A Spirit nerf, you say? Impossible. This was a change made during a PTB for the upcoming 4.3.0 patch, and launched in the same patch in October of 2020. This provided players with a new way to track, or at least tell when the Spirit was phasing and in her power, basically allowing for some quite substantial counterplay, which was a big deal for Spirit, a character who many argue has no counterplay at all. The way this worked was that her usual passive noises could be heard during her phase, moving from ear to ear on your headphones, allowing you to hone down the angle she was coming from, but also if she was moving at all, and therefore if she was phasing. This meant common Spirit mind games like standing still and waiting were not viable, because with this you could actually tell or have a general idea of where she was when in phase, but not exact enough that it destroyed her power. It was definitely good though for making playing her a bit more substantial and require more thought instead of just using her standstill play. The weird thing about this was there was no indication of this change, not in the patch notes, not on Twitter, nowhere. When it was outlined and patch 4.3.1 was released, the ability to hear where she generally was disappeared, and in a similar fashion to how it came about, it was removed and not so much as a reference in the patch notes to it being there in the first place, leading many to believe that the update and brief change was simply a bug. This was controversial because many were happy to see a change in the game to how Spirit could be countered. Upon its removal and subsequent silence on said removal, it became a point of controversy within the community on whether it should have stayed or whether it was meant to be a test or it really was just a bug. This one isn't so much a change as much as it is completely game breaking for some players. To the best of my knowledge, this is still going on too. This came about, I believe, upon the release of the Nemesis and the whole Resident Evil chapter. It started off as something maybe less noticeable, with issues like the Raccoon City police station map lagging quite a lot, but those were issues across all platforms, and the map was deactivated fairly quickly due to low performance. But then after this, more issues arose with console players experiencing large lag spikes, in particular with the Nemesis and when he struck his tentacle for an infection, or if a zombie infected someone. This would appear to happen on both ends too, for the person playing Nemesis and also the survivor on the receiving end. Typically this affected last gen console players the most. Other things that appeared to cause the lag spikes is the use of the perk Dead Hard, which can often make you go either an incredibly short distance or just simply freeze until the action is over. This makes it very hard for console players to, well, play, especially since crossplay was implemented. Many will be facing PC players who this lag largely doesn't affect. There was also supposedly a room in the RPD after its reactivation which could crash your game entirely or simply freeze you for a long duration. This is a really big problem with a large portion of the player base not able to play. From what I've seen across different sources like YouTube videos, Twitch streams, and forum posts, these issues with performance have spread to pretty much every part of the game, even making characters or maps lag on things released prior to 5.0.0, or the Resident Evil chapter. This begs the question, what is actually causing the lag? But also, when is this getting fixed? The only outright patch that was released on the topic of these performance issues, to the best of my recollection, is the 5.0.2 patch, although many noted this did not completely fix the lag, only reduce it. And we're nearing about 3 months now of this being an issue. This is a pretty serious issue with the game currently, and the most behavior is seemingly done about it since that initial patch is mark it down in patch notes that it's a known issue. This has been going on since around June of 2021, and there really needs to be something done about it, because currently a large portion of the player base literally cannot play. Alright, well, on that slightly dreary note, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and do let me know what you think of these changes, and also any other changes you recall. Thanks, and goodbye.